This is the third stop of the FLW Pro Circuit on Lake Martin in Alabama. This is a 44,000 acre reservoir with over 750 miles of shoreline. This is just a huge, huge lake. The sheer size of Lake Martin is enough to get you a little bit overwhelmed, but also choosing between the two different species that play a role in this lake. Spotted bass, which have played a bigger role in recent years, and of course largemouth bass, which is my primary strength. Choosing between those two species was very, very difficult. And during practice, I ended up fishing everything from reaction style baits such as a Z-Man sling blade spinner bait, caught quite a few fish on that. A crankbait played a big role, and then I also fished things that were more spawning fish oriented, such as wacky rigs and Ned rigs in the backs of pockets. And ultimately what I decided on by the end of practice was focusing on the largemouth. That seemed to be one of my core strengths anyways, so I kind of avoided all those spotted bass areas and focused on the largemouth in the backs of creeks and pockets. And one of the things that I was really concerned about was the fact that I was not getting consistent 2-pound bites. I was only getting the occasional, 2.5, possible 3-pound bite, maybe one per day. So my biggest concern going into the event was being able to run enough pockets, run enough areas, fish very efficiently and fish very clean to get the key bites in the boat that I needed, which were those 2+ pounders. On this lake, on Lake Martin, 2+ pounders are at a premium. And so going into the first day, I knew that efficiency was my key priority going into the day. So although I had a pretty poor practice, I wasn't seeing the size that I really wanted to see. I was really amped up to get out there and see if just pure efficiency was going to carry me through and to where I can get enough of those 2+ pound bites to do well. So started out in the morning, right off the bat, ended up running my spawning pocket pattern, running with a wacky rig, weightless worm, casting around likely areas where those fish were probably spawning. And it didn't take a whole lot of effort to end up catching the first fish all the way up through my limit. And I found myself constantly culling up, but I was only catching 12-inch, 13-inch and maybe 13.5-inch fish, that were between 3/4 pound to 1.5 pounds, and those absolutely weren't the sizes that I needed. So kept on running that pattern, and ended up fishing this one major creek for a good majority of the day, and really just couldn't find any bigger size. It was an area that I had caught my biggest fish during practice, a 3.5 pounder, and also a 2 3/4, but I was not able to really replicate that for the larger quality fish. And up until around noon, I had a limit for like 6.5. So I knew that I needed to make a switch and start running some new areas. And it wasn't until later in the afternoon that I finally started to find some better quality fish. And really one of the biggest keys was switching to a swim jig, a Z-Man 3/8 ounce bluegill colored snakehead swim jig. Really started doing some damage. I paired that with a minnows from Z-Man in the hot snakes color. That really started making a difference on the size that I was catching. after finally keying in on that swim jig bite, I was really happy to be able to cull out all those smaller fish that I caught earlier in the day, and finally was able to cull up to that 10-pound range. I ended up weighing in 10 pounds, 2 ounces, which doesn't sound like much, but on Lake Martin, that keeps you right in the mix. And so I was really happy to be able to break that 10-pound barrier. And so got back to weigh in, and really had to reevaluate what I was going to do for day 2. And I was really hoping that that swim jig bite would allow me to be more efficient, cover more water, and ultimately catch a even bigger bag the second day. All right, so I was pretty excited going into day 2 because finding that swim jig bite that allowed me to cover much more water than the wacky rig was really a big key for me. I needed something that could allow me to kind of counteract the fact that I was fishing through some dead water by fishing new areas throughout the day. So the swim jig was really promising because I could cover a lot of water and not spend too long in an area. And so I was really excited to get back out there. Ended up starting in a spot right by the launch, right there in Wind Creek, and immediately caught several fish. You know, put several fish in the boat. They still weren't the quality that I was looking for, but I was really stoked to be able to see that the swim jig bite was still on. One thing that I really started to note this day was the fact that the water was still dropping, and when you have dropping water in these spawning tournaments, that really can affect the mood of the fish, make them really hard to catch, really skittish. And so that's one thing that I started to notice, was that the swim jig bite wasn't quite what it was the day before, and I really attribute that to the falling water conditions. After fishing in Wind Creek for a little bit, I ended up bouncing around all over the place, and ended up finally finding one creek that really had a good population of largemouth. It was very, very shallow in the back. In fact, there was less than a foot in some areas, and I ended up having to pull the push pole out. But I immediately caught 2 fish on the swim jig. Unfortunately, I also ended up losing some very, very key fish, including a fish that I pitched over to a jet ski float with my wacky rig. It darted out, ate that bait, and went right back underneath, and I ended up losing that fish. It looked like it was around 2.5 to 3 pounds. And then very soon after that, I ended up spotting a pair of largemouth on the flat, and ended up casting the wacky rig over to those fish and hooked one that was between 2.5 and 3 pounds, another true giant on Lake Martin, a real key fish, and ended up losing that fish too. So losing those 2 key fish was a really big turning point for me in that day. I knew that was going to be hard to overcome, and I had to start getting some quality in the boat. About this time of the day, I ended up having some camera issues. Unfortunately, my camera kept on turning off, and had to repair the files on my SD card, and so I ended up missing some key bites that I ended up getting from then on. I ended up catching a 3.25 pounder that was really the size that I was looking for, and so I was really stoked on that one. Caught that one around 10:30 in the morning, and then really just started putting on the gas because I had that 3 pounder that I needed. Now I just needed a few 2-pound bites to call out those 1.25 pounds that I had in the well. And unfortunately, it really started to slow down. I started to really wonder why the swim jig bite wasn't happening. Was it the area that I was fishing? Were these areas that I was going to dead water, or had somebody already fished through them? What was the reason for the slow bite? Was it the falling water? I didn't know, but I just kept on running that pattern, hoping to find an area that ended up having better fish. And eventually, at the end of the day, I ended up finding a 2-pounder that waked my swim jig, ended up catching that fish. So a decent 2-pound bite, got that in the boat, brought me up to 8 pounds, 14 ounces. And unfortunately, by the end of the day, I ended up losing another fish that was about 2.5 pounds on the swim jig, and just could not get another solid bite. So ended up the day with 8 pounds, 14 ounces, which put me at 19 pounds total for the 2 days, finishing in 90th place. Easily the worst finish I've had so far this year. And although this event was very frustrating and I knew that I was so close, and I was really bummed that I ended up losing some key fish, it also taught me a lot. It taught me a lot about lakes that have a lot of dead water, and being able to eliminate water during practice, and just be a little bit more diligent during my practice period on lakes like this. And also be able to diversify my patterns, and figuring out something with the spotted bass is something that I really wish I had done. But overall, the Lake Martin event wasn't a very good one for me. Ended up dropping in the points a little bit, but there's still a lot of tournaments ahead on the FLW Pro Circuit. So thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions, of course, comment below. And make sure that you subscribe to Sonar Fishing. I'm going to have a lot more videos like this. So thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned on the FLW Pro Circuit. I'll see you guys out on the water. Pro Circuit Patterns is presented by BassBoatElectronics.com.